There is a question that sounds too obvious to deserve an answer, and it is this. Why does your body produce the same internal alarm in a peaceful living room at 67 that it used to produce during the most stressful workday of your 30 seconds? You are not in danger. The house is quiet. Nothing is chasing you. No deadline exists. And yet the cortisol is flowing, the shoulders are tight, the chest feels like someone is sitting on it, and falling asleep feels like trying to catch smoke with your hands. The obvious explanation is that you are simply carrying more worry now, more health concerns, more financial uncertainty, more awareness of time. And that explanation feels reasonable, so almost everyone accepts it and never looks further. But here is the thing about reasonable explanations. They are very good at hiding mechanical ones. What is actually happening is not primarily psychological. It is structural. It is physical. And it is happening to your body automatically, thousands of times per day, completely without your permission, driven by a change in your chest that began quietly after your 60th birthday and has been compounding ever since. Let me tell you what that change actually is. Not the simplified version. The version that involves the architecture of your rib cage, the physics of gas exchange, the electrochemistry of your heart, and the reason your brain is currently reading your own breathing as a biological red alert even when your life, by any objective measure, is completely fine. There is a dome-shaped muscle at the base of your lungs called the diaphragm. You did not choose it. Your body assembled it from the same cellular blueprint that built every mammal on Earth, and its job, its single, critical, non-negotiable job, is to drop downward when you inhale, creating a vacuum that pulls air deep into the lower chambers of your lungs, where the highest density of blood vessels sit waiting to absorb oxygen. When the diaphragm moves correctly, your brain receives a very specific mechanical signal, full, even expansion, lungs filling from the bottom up. The signal reads as stillness, safety, biological normalcy. But after 60, the cartilage connecting your ribs to your breastbone begins to calcify. Your chest wall loses its elasticity. Your diaphragm, like every other muscle in your body, loses mass and strength. And without enough muscular force to pull the chest cage open fully, your body quietly, automatically compensates by switching to a shallower style of breathing driven by the small muscles of your neck and upper chest. This is the moment everything changes, because shallow chest breathing is not neutral. It is not just a slightly less efficient way to breathe. Shallow chest breathing is the hardwired biological signal for one specific thing: that a predator is nearby, that your body is crouched and frozen, and that survival depends on keeping quiet and still while the stress hormones flood your system to prepare for violent movement. Your brain does not look out the window to confirm whether this is actually happening. Your brain looks at the movement of your diaphragm. That is its only evidence. That is the entire data stream it is reading. And if that data stream says shallow, high, tight chest movement, all day, every day, your brainstem translates it into a single command to your adrenal glands. Keep the cortisol coming. You are not imagining the stress. You are not emotionally fragile. You are not failing to cope with aging. You are accidentally running a survival program in your nervous system using the wrong kind of breath, and you have probably been doing it for years without ever knowing a biological override switch exists. It does exist. It was discovered in the 1930s. Every mammal on Earth already uses it instinctively, and once you understand the exact mechanical reason it works, down to the pressure physics, inside your air sacs, the chemistry of the gas exchange, and the electrical cascade down your vagus nerve, you will be able to use it consciously, precisely, in under 30 seconds anytime the cortisol starts to climb. When you were younger, your rib cage functioned like a perfectly engineered spring. Every time your diaphragm pulled downward and your lungs demanded space, the cartilage connecting your ribs to your breastbone flexed outward obediently, expanding your chest in all directions simultaneously, front, sides, and back, like a barrel being pried open from the inside. That flexibility was not cosmetic, it was load-bearing. It was the structural mechanism that made deep, complete breathing mechanically easy, the way a well-oiled door opens without you noticing the hinges. After 60, those hinges begin to calcify. The costal cartilage, the soft connective tissue that gave your rib cage its spring, gradually hardens and mineralizes. Calcium deposits accumulate in the joints where your ribs meet your sternum. The process is silent, invisible from the outside, and completely normal from a biological standpoint. Your doctor will not call it a disease. but the mechanical consequence is significant. Your chest wall progressively loses its ability to expand outward with ease. The barrel that once opened freely now has rusted hinges, and every breath you take is working against a structure that is subtly, increasingly resistant to being opened. Most people never notice this directly. They do not wake up one day unable to breathe. The change is gradual enough that the body compensates before you ever become consciously aware of it. And that compensation, quiet, automatic, entirely invisible, is where the real problem begins. Because your body does not simply accept the stiffer cage and take shallower breaths as a new default. It recruits back up. When the diaphragm and expanding rib cage can no longer do the full job together, your nervous system calls in the secondary respiratory muscles. The scalenes in your neck, the sternocleidomastoid running from behind your ear to your collarbone, the small intercostals between your ribs, the muscles of your upper chest and shoulders. These muscles were designed for emergency use, for heavy exertion, for the final sprint, for the moment when your primary breathing system simply cannot keep up. They are not built for continuous all-day operation, but that is exactly what they are now doing. Observe someone over 65 who is not actively thinking about their breathing, sitting still in a chair, watching television, completely relaxed by any social definition of that word. Watch the movement of their body carefully. In most cases, you will see the upper chest and shoulders rising and falling with each breath. The belly stays relatively still, the lower rib cage barely moves. The breath is happening from the collarbone down an inch or two, rather than from the belly up to the collarbone. It looks calm. It looks normal. It looks like breathing. What it does not look like, to the part of your brain responsible for reading respiratory mechanics as biological data, is safety. Your brainstem, specifically the regions that monitor your autonomic state, does not evaluate your environment to decide whether you are stressed. It does not consider your bank balance or your relationships or how pleasant the afternoon is. It monitors one set of inputs: the physical signals coming from inside your own body, the rate of your heart, the chemistry of your blood, and the mechanical movement of your respiratory system. That last one is the input almost nobody talks about, and it is the one that is currently lying to your brain. Shallow chest breathing is the body's universal biological posture for threat. It is what every mammal does when crouching in stillness, hiding from a predator, compressing itself into the minimum possible profile while the stress response loads the muscles with glucose and the heart rate climbs. Your brainstem learned to read that movement pattern as a survival signal hundreds of millions of years before language existed. It does not distinguish between genuine danger and a mechanical default caused by calcified cartilage. It reads the signal. It responds to the signal. It does not ask for context, and the response it sends is a steady, continuous release of cortisol from the adrenal glands sitting just above your kidneys. Not a cortisol spike, not the acute surge you would feel in a genuine emergency, which would be dramatic enough that you would recognize something was wrong. A drip, a slow, low-grade, constant infusion of the stress hormone into your bloodstream, calibrated to match the level of threat your breathing pattern is implying, which is moderate, persistent, and ongoing. The kind of threat that does not require you to flee immediately, but that definitely requires you to stay ready. This is why the anxiety of aging so often feels different from the anxiety of youth. Young stress tends to be acute. It spikes around events and then releases. The cortisol that shallow breathing generates after 60 does not release, because the signal generating it does not stop. Every shallow chest breath is another data point telling your brainstem that the danger is still present. There is no clear signal, because the thing triggering the alarm is not an event. It is the architecture of your chest. But the CO2 is not finished yet. When your breathing becomes shallow and the lower regions of your lungs stop being fully ventilated, the gas exchange that is supposed to happen there, the trading of used carbon dioxide for fresh oxygen across the delicate membranes, becomes incomplete. Stale CO2, which should be expelled with every full exhalation, begins to pool at the base of your lungs. The concentration rises slowly, incrementally, just a fraction above the threshold your brainstem considers acceptable. Your brainstem monitors blood CO2 continuously through chemoreceptors in your carotid arteries and medulla. These sensors are exquisitely sensitive. They were calibrated by evolution to detect suffocation before it becomes fatal, which means they are set to trigger well in advance of any real emergency. A mild elevation of CO2, the kind produced by chronic shallow breathing, is enough to activate them. And when they activate, the message they send upward is unambiguous. The respiratory system is not clearing waste efficiently. Something is compromised. Respond accordingly. The adrenal glands receive the message. The cortisol drip continues. Now here is the layer beneath even that, the part that is genuinely counterintuitive the first time you encounter it. Your lungs are not hollow bags. They are not smooth-walled chambers that fill with air the way a balloon fills. They are more like an upside-down tree, a branching structure of passages that get progressively smaller as they reach deeper into lung tissue, terminating finally in clusters of microscopic pouches called alveoli. You have approximately 500 million of them. Lined up side by side, their total surface area would cover roughly the floor space of a tennis court. That surface is where all meaningful gas exchange actually happens. The airways just deliver air to the alveoli. The alveoli are the lungs. Each alveolus is coated on the inside with a thin film of fluid and a surfactant, a detergent-like substance that reduces surface tension and keeps the sac open and pliant. Think of it like a thin film of soap on the inside of a bubble. Without that tension-reducing film, the walls of the sac would pull inward and collapse, the way two wet surfaces stick together when pressed flat. The surfactant is what prevents this. It is what keeps the alveoli inflated and available for gas exchange even at the end of a full exhalation, when the lungs are at their smallest volume. With age, surfactant production and distribution become less efficient. The alveoli in the lower lobes of your lungs, which due to gravity are already the least well-ventilated zones during shallow breathing, begin to close off at the end of exhalation and fail to reopen fully with the next breath. Not dramatically, not all at once, incrementally over years, the way a sponge dries out and the smaller pores stop holding water. Some alveoli spend hours at a time effectively shut, their walls pressed together, bypassed entirely by the shallow tidal breathing flowing above them. Stale CO2 sits trapped in those closed sacs with nowhere to go. Fresh oxygen cannot reach the capillaries wrapped around them. And from the perspective of your nervous system, the lungs are reporting a persistent partial inefficiency in gas exchange that looks, from the inside, like the early stages of suffocation. The cortisol drip continues. Scientists have known for nearly a century that something was trying to fix this problem from the inside. In the 1930s, physiologists studying mammalian respiration noticed an anomaly in breathing recordings. Periodically, every few minutes during rest, and much more frequently during high-stress periods or emotional episodes, both humans and animals would produce a breath that looked fundamentally different from all the others. Not a deep breath in the way people commonly mean, not a single large inhale, something more specific. A normal-sized inhale immediately followed, before any exhale had occurred, by a second sharp burst of inhalation layered on top of the first. Then a long, slow exhale. They called it the physiological sigh. It appeared in dogs, in primates, in newborns, in sleeping adults, in people who were crying or frightened or overwhelmed. It appeared with such consistency across species, age groups, and emotional states that it could not be a learned behavior. It was hardwired, built into the brainstem at the level of basic survival reflexes, alongside coughing and swallowing and blinking. Your body already knows how to do this. You have been doing it your entire life, mostly while asleep, completely without awareness. What the researchers did not fully understand in the 1930s, what required decades more of respiratory physiology, surfactant chemistry, and neuroimaging to work out completely, was exactly why it worked. Why that specific double inhale pattern, and not any other kind of deep breathing, consistently and reliably reset the respiratory system. The answer, it turns out, is pressure physics, and it is precise enough that once you understand it, the entire architecture of the solution becomes obvious, and the fact that nobody taught it to you earlier starts to feel like an extraordinary oversight. When you take a single deep breath, the kind people have been telling you to take your entire life whenever stress arrives, something specific happens inside your lungs. The airways expand, air moves inward. The upper and middle regions of your lungs fill reasonably well, but the collapsed alveoli in the lower lobes, the ones whose walls have been pressed together like wet plastic bags for the past several hours, do not open. They cannot open. The pressure generated by a single inhale, even a large one, is not sufficient to overcome the surface tension holding those walls together. The air takes the path of least resistance, flowing into the passages that are already open, bypassing the closed ones entirely. A single deep breath, however well-intentioned, leaves the collapsed zones collapsed. This is the precise mechanical reason that the standard advice fails. Take a deep breath is not wrong in spirit, it is wrong in physics. The physiological sigh solves a problem that a single inhale cannot because it does not work by volume alone. It works by pressure differential. Here is what happens when you execute it correctly. You inhale through your nose, a full, deliberate breath that fills your lungs to roughly 70 or 80% of capacity. At this point, the airways are expanded, the open alveoli are inflated, and the air pressure inside your lungs has risen significantly above the pressure that existed in the closed alveoli. Those collapsed sacs are now sitting in lung tissue that is pressurized around them. Their walls are still stuck together, but they are under mechanical stress from the surrounding inflation. Then, before you exhale a single molecule of air, you snap a second sharp inhale on top of the first. This second inhale does not need to be large. It is not about adding enormous additional volume. What it does is create a sudden, brief spike in intrapulmonary pressure, a rapid pressure burst that travels down every airway simultaneously, reaching the entrances of even the most peripheral, most deeply collapsed alveolar clusters. The walls of those sacs, already under tension from the surrounding inflation and now hit with a pressure wave from above, pop open. Not gradually, not partially. The surface tension threshold is crossed abruptly, the way a sealed envelope tears cleanly once the pressure behind it reaches the right point. Millions of alveoli that have been sitting shut for hours, trapping stale gas, withdrawing their surface area from the exchange process, silently contributing to the CO2 buildup your brainstem has been reading as a suffocation signal, open simultaneously. The surface area of your functional lungs just increased dramatically in under 2 seconds. Now the CO2 that has been pooling in those dormant sacs has somewhere to go. The capillaries wrapped around the newly opened alveoli are immediately available. The concentration gradient between the high CO2 air trapped inside the sacs and the relatively low CO2 blood flowing in those capillaries is steep, steeper than normal, because the gas has been accumulating for a long time. Diffusion across the alveolar membrane is not a slow process under ordinary conditions, but under these conditions, with a large concentration gradient and a suddenly enormous surface area, it is nearly instantaneous by biological standards. The stale carbon dioxide floods across the membranes in a single wave. The blood picks it up. It will be carried to the right side of the heart and from there into the pulmonary circulation to be expelled. Your brainstem's chemoreceptors, which have been registering that slight CO2 elevation as a low-grade suffocation signal for hours, detect the change within seconds. The blood gas chemistry has shifted. The alarm condition they were monitoring is resolving. The cortisol justification they were maintaining begins to lose its biological basis. But the breath is not finished. The exhale has not happened yet, and the exhale is where the second half of the mechanism lives. You let it out slowly, not forcefully, not in a sharp burst, slowly, completely, taking somewhere between 4 and 8 seconds to empty your lungs as fully as comfortable. And as you exhale, your diaphragm does something that almost nobody thinks about consciously. It moves upward. When your lungs are full, your diaphragm sits in its lowest, most descended position, pulled downward by the tension of the inflated lungs above it. As the air leaves and the lungs deflate, that tension releases, and the diaphragm rises back toward its resting dome shape, ascending into the lower chest cavity. On a normal, shallow breath, this movement is small and incomplete. On a full exhale following a physiological sigh, the diaphragm travels its entire available range, rising significantly into the thoracic space. This upward movement compresses the chest cavity from below. Your heart sits in that cavity. It is not rigidly fixed. It is suspended in the pericardium, surrounded by the lungs and bounded below by the diaphragm. When the diaphragm ascends and the lungs deflate simultaneously, the total internal volume of the chest cavity decreases. The heart is gently compressed within a smaller space, and when the physical space the heart occupies decreases, the blood flowing through it is pushed through slightly faster. The velocity of blood moving through the heart's chambers increases during the exhale phase, a phenomenon called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, which is so consistent and measurable that cardiologists use its presence as an indicator of a healthy responsive nervous system. The heart wall has sensors, specifically stretch receptors embedded in the walls of the cardiac chambers and the large vessels, part of the baroreceptor system that monitor blood pressure and flow velocity continuously. These sensors are not passive. They are in constant dialogue with the brainstem, reporting the mechanical state of the cardiovascular system in real time. When blood velocity through the heart increases, even modestly, those receptors register the change and send an immediate signal upward. The flow rate has increased relative to the current chamber volume. The system is reading this as the heart working harder than the current situation requires. The brainstem receives the signal, and it responds the only way it knows how to respond to a heart that appears to be running faster than necessary. It applies the brake. The brake is the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the human body, running from the brainstem down through the neck, into the chest, branching to the heart and lungs, and continuing into the abdomen. It is the primary highway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the system responsible for everything labeled rest and recovery. When the brainstem decides the heart needs to slow down, it sends an electrical signal down the vagus nerve to the sinoatrial node, the heart's own pacemaker, a small cluster of specialized cells in the right atrium wall that sets the rhythm for every heartbeat. The vagus nerve releases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine directly onto the sinoatrial node. Acetylcholine does not accelerate, it inhibits. It quiets the pacemaker cells, lengthening the interval between each electrical firing, slowing the heart rate measurably and within seconds. This is not metaphorical relaxation. This is not a mood shift or a psychological reframe. It is a direct electrochemical intervention in the mechanical rhythm of your heart, executed by your own nervous system in response to a physical signal generated by the movement of your own diaphragm. Heart rate variability. The slight rhythmic fluctuation in the timing between heartbeats increases. Blood pressure drops marginally. The cardiovascular system shifts its operating mode from the elevated, ready state of sympathetic dominance toward the lower, recovery state of parasympathetic dominance. And the cascade that follows is the one your adrenal glands have been waiting for. Cortisol production is not a runaway process. It is a regulated one. The adrenal glands release cortisol in response to signals from the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, which in turn are responding to the brain's overall assessment of the body's safety status. That assessment is built from multiple inputs: blood chemistry, heart rate, respiratory pattern, sensory data. When those inputs collectively shift from alarm to stability, the hypothalamic signal to the adrenal glands changes accordingly. The instruction to keep producing cortisol is withdrawn. The drip slows. The baseline drops. 2 or 3 complete cycles of the physiological sigh. Double inhale through the nose, long slow exhale through the mouth, executed back to back, are sufficient to drive this entire cascade from beginning to end. The CO2 clears. The alveoli reopen. The diaphragm moves fully. The heart is compressed and the vagus nerve fires. The pacemaker slows. The brain registers safety. The cortisol ceiling drops. 30 seconds. No equipment, no cost, no prescription required. The habit is not complicated to build. When you feel the chest tightening, the shoulders rising, the low-grade unease settling in without an obvious cause, and you will recognize it differently now because you know what is actually generating it, you simply use it. 2 sharp inhales through the nose, the second one snapping in on top of the first before any air escapes, then a slow, full exhale through the mouth that empties completely. Repeat twice more. That is the entire practice. The mechanism does the rest, because the mechanism is not a technique you are imposing on your body from the outside. It is a reflex your body already possesses, already uses, and already trusts. You are simply choosing to activate it consciously rather than waiting for your sleeping brainstem to deploy it on your behalf at 3 in the morning. What changes when you understand the full chain? The calcified cage, the weakened diaphragm, the trapped gas, the collapsed alveoli, the cortisol drip, the pressure physics, the vagus nerve, the pacemaker, is not just that you have a tool. What changes is that you stop being confused about your own body. You stop interpreting the anxiety as evidence that something is psychologically wrong with you, that you are failing to age gracefully, that your nervous system has simply become fragile. None of those things were ever true. Your nervous system was responding rationally and precisely to a mechanical signal. The signal was inaccurate. Now you know how to correct it. The architecture of the aging chest is not a flaw. It is a known variable, and known variables can be worked with.